Right. So to talk today, as a matter of request, is about true orthodoxy. Well, what is true orthodoxy? Obviously, anyone who's orthodox is going to be truly orthodox. That is part of the faith. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. So any of us in Christ are in the truth. And so orthodoxy is truth, and it should be kept truly. But the true orthodox are those who are claiming and arguing that the ancient patriarchates, or the bishops that are on the seas of ancient patriarchates, are making decisions, etc., and that are contrary to the faith of the church. Now, initially, a lot of these groups came about due to the use or innovation of the new revised Julian calendar. It's not exactly the Gregorian calendar, it's the new revised Julian calendar, which keeps almost very close to the Gregorian calendar for a large time, but it is not actually the same calendar, just to be correct. And this caused a huge scandal among Orthodox who up to the 1920s used to following the Julian calendar. Just as it once upon a time caused a scandal in the UK in the 1750s when the UK went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, because the UK was Protestant and did not want to follow the Papist calendar. And so it caused a huge scandal in the UK as well, as it later caused in the Greek churches. So this is the ground of it. But coupled with this is the movement or the opposition to what's called ecumenism, that there are relations with those who were considered separated from the Orthodox churches, that were not in hierarchical and liturgical communion with the Orthodox churches, but continued some form of Christian heritage. And this includes such as the Copts, the Syriacs, and the Roman Catholics, who they are trying to speak of some form of reunion with these groups and to some form of common prayer, common activities with them. And we get all sorts of, and I think there's a group called the World Council of Churches trying to work with them in some form of common Christian ideal. Anyway, so this caused these group of many in Greece, and it also went on to Romania, Bulgaria, not so much in Russia, because Russia didn't change the calendar. So you've got areas which the official patriarch has accepted a new calendar. You've got a movement of people who want to stick to the old calendar, and they separated off. There were initially possibly a couple of bishops, but generally the bishops didn't go off. They stuck with the official hierarchy of the churches, the episcopal hierarchy. And so you had a few priests more and laity who broke off for varying degrees of divine signs that this was the right thing. There's a classic case of the cross appearing in the sky. And I'm not going to judge whether it's true or not. Eventually, what happened is they didn't have any bishops, and the Russian church abroad, being conservative, against ecumenism and against the calendar, and maintaining the old calendar, some of their bishops, a little bit illegitimately, came and started consecrating bishops for the old calendar churches in Greece. And then since then they have formed their own synod of bishops that runs parallel to those in Greece. And this group has run a parallel jurisdiction to the patriarchal jurisdictions in Bulgaria, Romania, and in the US, and a little bit in the UK, and in other places. and they call themselves the genuine or true Orthodox. Now, one of the issues that came about them, they ended up sort of splintering into multiple groups for quite some time. I believe in the last 10 years or so, there has been an attempt to reconcile themselves into more of a unified group, but they did split up. And this is one of the problems when you separate in this for the sake of a faith from the hierarchical structures of a church. When it comes just to faith, you have the same problem as the Protestants, is that you keep forever splitting up from one group to another. So the Protestants have multiple groups, each claiming to be more consistent with the Bible than the next, and each claiming the other is not quite right. Now, the Orthodox probably more than most of Protestants actually in the end sort of say, well, all of us have this problem, so we sort of semi-accept everybody as being there as long as they're not Roman Catholic. And Orthodox, this sort of depends on which one they are, what flavour they are. But the old calendars are a little bit even more strict and on this. But the trouble is, as soon as you start breaking away the hierarchical institutions, remaining in communion with the hierarchical institutions, it's very hard to stop splitting into more and more different groups on the matter of truth, because you just simply use the faith as a guide in itself. Then you end up having troubles about, oh, well, you've got a little bit different from me. Where do you draw the line? How much faith or acceptance do you have to be? Do they have, are the old calendars, do they have grace? Do they not have grace? Are we in resistance? Or are we the church and they have no more church? There's all these debates go on and they all split up on each other. So my experience of them all is that I follow St. James in the Bible. If you follow the commandments, you follow all of them. You break one, you break them all. And so when I see these groups and I look at their doctrine and their teaching, yes, perhaps they are more accurate vis-a-vis the relationships to Roman Catholics and Copts, etc. But at the same time, they are not perfect. They don't follow all the canons. They keep 6 and break 5. Okay, our patriarchs may be breaking 7 and keeping 6 on this, but this in itself, if you're not perfect, you're breaking 1, then you have what is the reason to be with you, because you're not there, and this fragmenting system. And so basically, sadly, the church is founded around hierarchical institutions. It is founded on the bishop of the presbyters in each place, united to their metropolitans, and each bishop is recognized by all the metropolitans. It's not just 3 coming to ordain that makes it good. It is a recognition of all the metropolitans. That it's a recognition of the whole church and symbol for that each local church is a member of the whole church. And then the metropolitans gathered around their patriarchs. In this structure, the canons are quite clear. We should stick to this unless the patriarchs start teaching something which is already condemned by the ecumenical councils effectively, or the fathers, they say, but by ecumenical councils in the past, already condemned, already. And so when we talk about a council that condemns them, it's one that they are either a local or a universal council which applies to them. So there's no good saying a council in Russia decides something and then asking ecumenical patriarch to be obedient to that council. No, that council is a local council. The ecumenical patriarch is only bound to the decisions of the ecumenical councils or ecumenically recognized fathers, not to something that happens in Russia or Serbia. Even if the Russian and Serbian council is correct, where we cannot hold the ecumenical patriarch accountable to this as such. So we keep the structure unless they have preached something which is already condemned. So they do it publicly and openly. Such they actually in their sermons as they start actually teaching these things. So for example, Arianism, they start saying there was a time when Christ was not. They start using the catchphrases of the way of speaking of the heretics in their own sermons. And this is where we move away, because we see that they've said something which the fathers have already condemned. We're not acting as judges ourselves on their actions. So they have been judged by the judgments of the fathers before, because they have said something which has been condemned as a statement. So we've got to be very careful not to think, oh, they might be meaning this, they're implying this. No, they have to be actually stating things which have actually been condemned. So we are then just applying the judgment that has already been given. We're not exercising any thing where we were sort of saying, is he or is he not actually meeting this standard or talking a heresy? No, it's clear that they are teaching a heresy which has already been condemned by teaching the things of the heresy which have the fathers are clearly condemned. This is the standard. That protects us. Other than that, we stick to our patriarchs, even if they go off into some weird and wonderful things, as long as they don't cross the boundary of teaching explicitly what has already been condemned, we stick with them. Doesn't mean that we follow them in everything they do. No. As Christ says, we follow the teachings of those in the seat of Moses, the Pharisees, but we don't do as they do. And if they go running off to do common prayers with popes and stuff like that, we don't go follow along with this. But as long as they're not formally teaching that we must do this, that is a matter of our faith, that we must be in communion with these people and we must be doing these actions, that's okay. They're not imposing on us to do anything contrary to Christ. They themselves will be condemned for their actions, but they're not imposing on us to believe or act contrary to the tradition of the apostles, contrary to Christ. And the danger of the true Orthodox is they're correct, a lot of these things. These are problems. But they've formed their own synods apart from the church. They've created a structure other than the church without the standard being met that these patriarchs have actually started teaching heresy. Even if they have gone very close to doing it in their actions, they haven't formally started teaching these things. You'll notice that the ecumenical patriarchs are very careful not to actually make certain statements of this. So, of this type. It's very difficult, so we must be careful here, but to create a new synod, a new structure which is parallel, this is a schism, and this is an act of schism. And so even if you're right, your orthodoxy, you are still in a state of schism on this thing. And so we must be very careful to avoid that and stay in union with the churches and stick to the Orthodox faith and maintain it. And until such time we are forced to act or declare a creed. So if they force us to interpolate the creed, like put the filioque in the creed and say we must confess this creed, then we don't do this. We put this aside, and we may even have to step aside from a bishop that is trying to force us to use the creed with something like the filioque. This is a blasphemy to do so, and we don't follow on this case. But until that time, we struggle along, trying to do our little bit in our little way, keeping the traditions as best we can. As I said, as so long as the bishops are not trying to force us to do things contrary to the traditions of the church, we carry on in our own way, in our own place at home, etc. So the old calendarists, though they might be correct on certain points, are usually not correct on all points. They have actually gone against the tradition of the church in maintaining themselves within the hierarchies of the church without due justification to go forth. Ecumenism is bad, but it's not itself a heresy already pre-condemned. The supreme of heretics is an action which is condemned, but the patriarchs are not teaching us that we must accept this sort of prayers, must go and join them. If there's a Roman Catholic Church nearby, you've got to go along and go to prayer with them. They're not saying to the faithful here, you've got to go to Roman Catholic churches in England or Anglican churches. We're not going to provide bishops because there's local churches here you can go to. They're not saying that. They are still providing bishops, even if they're inconsistent with themselves, because truly, if they believe that the Roman Catholic's a sister church, Constantinople and all that have no right to be in the UK because it's a Roman Catholic territory. They should be telling all their people to go to Roman Catholic churches. When you come to the UK, you go to a Roman Catholic church. Or if they believe that the Anglicans are truly the church, you tell all the people to go to Anglican churches. They have no right to be putting their bishops here because then they are schismatics for turning up here and bringing their own bishops in the land where they have already recognised the bishops of this other country, holding services for their own people without the consent of the local bishops. And they fall into ethnophilitism, or we're doing it because we're looking after Greeks or Romans. What is this? This is not, the church is not about ethnicism. It is about the orthodoxy of faith. And so the two go hand to hand, actually. This ethnicism and ecumenism go hand to hand. And you'll find this is one of the big problems in places the UK and stuff. Many of the bishops are more ethnarchs than they are Orthodox, faithful, and they have had to look after Romanians and Russians, which is a further problems which we have with Orthodox practice at the moment. But the fact that they're here means they don't actually believe and practice that the Roman Catholics are truly the church, even if they say these nice things, because otherwise they would tell their people to go to Roman Catholic churches and take their bishops away from Western Europe, because they would be schismatics for daring to enter the territory of another patriarchate. But I've not seen this. So they say one thing but do another. This is not good, but nevertheless, it means that they are not totally consumed by this. So again, the justification for the old calendarist movement, the true Orthodox, etc., is not yet justified. It's not actually that canonical, even though they claim to be these things. Having said that, if you look on Mount Athos, the more traditional monasteries, the ones who are concerned about the priority of apostolic tradition over and against the obedience to the bishop, so this is a tension in Mount Athos. There are some monasteries which are very close to whatever the bishop, patriarch says we do, and this is a good thing in some level to obey the bishop. And others are more, we put holy tradition first, we obey the bishop as a secondary part of that, but first we all follow tradition. And you'll see, like Elder Ephraim in Arizona was of this mindset. And if you go to that mindset, then there is a case of tolerating the bishops, but a subtle, you only obey so far as that obedience does not force you to contradict the traditions of the church. And these people are also quite tolerant of the old calendarists. Elder Joseph, Saint Joseph, the Hesychast, was very close to becoming old calendarist, but he had a vision of seeing them floating out on an island separated from the churches. And this is correct. This is the idea. They cut themselves off. They actually float on the island away from the church. But nevertheless, he had interest in following them because he had interest that they were trying to hold tradition and the priority. And it's sometimes a good thing for them to do that. That forming into a schism is not good, but the desire for tradition is good. And so we should have an empathy for the old calendarists, to have a sort of a tolerance of them in some ways, because there are genuine reasons for their activities, their decisions. That's not correct, but nevertheless, they have got certain incentives for doing that. So we hope for the best of them. Now you'll find some of the bishops will be worse against the old calendarists who are trying to become faithful Orthodox than the Roman Catholics, because they're more interested in their episcopal power and obedience and hierarchies and things than they are in the matters of faith and what is actually believed and taught. And so they'll be very harsh against the old calendarists, also because old calendarists in their own areas, and they are causing problems with their flock, whereas the Roman Catholics are far away, and so they're not really a problem, even though the Roman Catholics are in places like Greece and Cyprus, etc. So, but there's a little bit of inconsistency with this. So my experience is we have a certain tolerance of them. Like, so for example, Espig Menu on the Holy Mountain, you'll find that the more tradition-focused monasteries will say, leave them alone. Yes, they're in schism, they're offload, but that's not try to force them out. The ones who are more hierarchical obedience, above tradition, get rid of them, throw them out, let the army come in and arrest them and throw them out. This is a different attitude. And my attitude is, personally, as a presbyter, is the one that put the apostolic tradition first. Let's just be tolerant of them. So let's not go around condemning there. But it is best to stay away from them, because unfortunately they have set their own hierarchy up in opposition to the church, and this is a state of, really, it is a schism by bringing up your own hierarchy, and we should stay away from this. Even if I respect them in many ways, nevertheless we shouldn't be joining in, because they have separated from the hierarchy of the church. And the church is founded on the patriarchs and the metropolitans and the bishops in this communion. And so far, there is no justification that they've actually, I've seen any official documents, any official teaching, they're actually teaching ancient heresies, or they've gone into formal communion with the Roman Catholics or the Monophysites or things. There are some very questionable practices and behaviours which are going on, but at the formal official level, where it matters to any parish, where I'm obliged to have to accept this, they haven't crossed those boundaries quite yet. So, though I share the concerns of the old colonists on some of these things. But anyway, so we should be, but stay away, but respectful. If you've got the to anti them, that is not good. And what else on that one? Otherwise, yes, we should try to keep the traditions in the whole, and this is actually keeping with the patriarchs, except the conditions I stated. The other thing I was saying is that actually a slightly better position is one where one breaks communion with the bishop if they are seen to be in heresy, but doesn't go off and create a new hierarchical structure beyond that. And so there are occasional cases where a particular bishop may be teaching heresy and the priest walls himself off. And if the bishop has actually taught a heresy which is condemned, and you see his words, you can say, then yes, this is a more honourable thing than setting up. However, this type of thing can be short-lived, because what will happen is a presbyter can't replicate himself, go on, and so that will last for a while, but it really needs the new bishop to be put in who is not a heretic. And the danger of this is you end up, to preserve yourself over more than a generation, you have to sort of end up with a little schism of finding other bishops, etc., or start teaching doctrines about the right of place of a presbytery and stuff, where you don't need bishops and all this and that. I'm okay by myself, and the presbyter can do all these ordinations and stuff to try to take on episcopal roles to justify continuing the parish. And this ends up in other kettlefish. And this is again why, if you go off into schism, it's often you end up having to teach heresy to justify the continuation of the schism, which is why the canons very much stay with your patriarchs, stay with your bishops, unless they really cross the line, which really obviously cross the line, bareheaded, fully, openly, not I think he has, or maybe, or stuff. No, they've really clearly done it. Because if we don't, so easy to fall up the schisms, and then you have to try to justify what you're doing, and you're making bishops out of nothing and things like that, trying to preserve the church. It doesn't work. It's not the way the church works, unfortunately. So that's why, though I have all good respect for some of their opinions, and I agree with them in some ways, and some ways it's no harmful to read some of their things to keep us remembering the way of the traditions. We must be careful not to break from the patriarchates unless we really publicly, clearly teach things that are really condemned as heresies. They really cross the line. And then we just hope in God's mercy that even if they're messing up and doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, the grace is still there, but we're still in the church, and we're still united to the church, connected to them, remembering them in the liturgies, etc., praying for them, of course, and God will hopefully preserve it. But that preserves us from so many other problems which come about and prevents us sort of ending up this constant fragmentation. I'm more correct, you're more correct. Once you start going down there, it gets very hard to hold yourself together, because the glue which holds us together is actually the hierarchical structure. And it can allow for certain mistakes, but as soon as you break from that hierarchical structure, then the glue to hold is given what is going to be faith. And then where do you draw the line on what the faith? It's all or nothing sort of thing. And so one says this, one says that, you end up splitting into a fragmentation very quickly. Which is why we need both the hierarchical structure, the patriarchal structure to bind us together, as well as the Orthodox faith. The Orthodox faith does have priority. So if the structure does contradict it clearly and strongly, then we need to hold to tradition rather than the structure. But it has to be very clear, as I've kept repeating, before you do that. And so true Orthodoxy, while they do many good things, have broken off, I believe, too early, set up a parallel structure to that which is schismatic. And when I go to them, I'm not seeing them actually holding the whole tradition of the church perfectly. And as St. James says, if you don't keep one law, you've broken the rest. So if you're going to go off like that, you have to be absolutely perfect on your obedience. And they're not. And again, one of the problems of these true Orthodox is you get some really good people there, some very faithful people, and may God look after them. But you get all sorts of charlatans, all people sort of going for power, for glory, taking opportunity. Oh, I want to be a great bishop and stuff. And they play the names, but they don't really have faith. They don't really have thing. They just take an opportunity to promote themselves, etc., and glorify themselves because there's a smaller group they might get in the political power and stuff. So you get all sorts of weirdos, people that play on this and take advantage of things in these groups. So you've got to be very careful about the quality of people there. As I said, most of them are really good, honest, trying to be pious, but it's open to a lot of these people that are not good, that are getting there trying to take advantage of the situation. So we've got to be very careful. But yes, that's it. So let us keep the traditions of the church as being passed on, but let us, as part of that, let us stick to our patriarchs, our metropolitans and our bishops, and lest they really openly, clearly teach some sort of heresy, and you see not just your opinion, but there's a whole mass of people who all agree that this is the case. And until then, stick with it, keep praying, keep yourself vigorous at your home. The most important thing is to keep your own spiritual life going, not to get caught up in all these controversies, and worry about these things too much, but go to your own local parish, take communion and do your own spiritual life, your own fasting and things like this, and humility and love. Focus on what you can control in your little world, and do your penance, do your actions, and God, that is what you need most, and that's what speaks to others, and that in itself helps others around to stick to the Orthodox faith in practice, in faith and in practice, because our tradition is a combination of faith and practice. There we
go. Okay, Father, so the question I have been asked in the past, and I'm still being asked, to be honest, is about the sacraments. It's so-called true Orthodox, genuine Orthodox church. Are they valid or not?
Good question. Strictly, if we go by St. Cyprian of Carthage, the mysteries of those that are either in heresy or in schism are apart from the church, so they are not good. The mysteries are themselves predicated on union with Christ, with union with the church. So if you are in schism of the church, how can you have something which unites you to the church? The mysteries cannot work in a state where the group offering them are standing in opposition or division from Christ, because the mysteries are precisely for union with Christ, bringing us together in one, which is why the mysteries don't work apart from the communion or the unity of the church. And very a lot of ecumenists are sort of thinking that Roman Catholic baptism stuff have this. Well, if you're doing that, as St. Cyprian says, you are giving them the church, because mysteries are union with the church, we're union with Christ. And so by definition, as soon as you've broken that union, the Holy Spirit departs, because you're no longer part of the body of Christ, and your mysteries no longer are able to unite with them. Now, having said that, in principle, there may be a way of exception or God where they are technically separated, but because of their zeal or their desire to keep orthodoxy, there might be an excuse in the economy where God allows the mystery to be still valid for their salvation because there is grounds for them to be concerned, etc. And so I don't give up all hope of this, even though strictly speaking, the mysteries shouldn't be working, but for the grace of God, despite the schism, maybe that he has some mercy on them and hasn't cast them off yet. So having said one thing, I work in a state of hope that despite the schism, that they are good. My personal opinion is that we shouldn't be rebaptizing those from old calendars who have been baptized as we are, because at least they keep the form and the rite properly, and because there's some difficulty of who's baptized who and where we draw the boundaries between these groups. This sort of person, chrismation is better. So you're not sort of because there's uncertainty in that, and because their rituals are done properly, this is fine. If this is a case where I would say, normally I believe someone coming from sort of Protestant backgrounds is best to be baptized, but some of these ones, because they're doing the same thing as us, and there's a little bit uncertainty, we're better to not. Does it mean that they are saved in their situation? Well, strictly no, they're in danger, but we have good hope in the Lord that will have mercy on them of their baptisms are there. So, but I think this is definitely a case where even if their baptisms were not regenerative, that receiving them by chrismation is a better policy, and it just saves a whole lot of confusion stuff. However, I'm not the driver of some of these policies. That's up to the bishops, etc., to decide. So I have to go along with their formal policies on this. And yes, so there we go.
Yeah, thank you, Father. And one following the sacraments question. So you have mentioned some priests who are or bishops who are ecumenists. Yeah, they preach the ecumenists, and one of the arguments of this genuine Orthodox or the old calendars is then because of the ecumenism is considered as a heresy or pan-heresy, as St. Eusebius said. But the sacraments of the priests who are under the bishop who doesn't preach the condemn heresy, if you want, they are valid. There is no, if they are in a church, if they are under the bishop and patriarch, they are valid. There shouldn't be any question about that, right?
Right, yeah, no, this is where it gets tricky. This is a bit here. Yes, generally the sacraments of those with bishops who are recognized by the patriarchs, etc., are valid, and there's a good thing for that. I think St. Augustine talks about this against Donatus. So we don't start judging the personal sins, etc., of the presbyter for whether the mystery is true on the altar. And there's a protection for that, because all of us presbyters are sinners, and where exactly we draw the line where my sin is too bad for the thing. God doesn't, to protect the people, let them the mysteries be good, even if the priest gets condemned and thrown to hell for his sins. The mysteries are still good because of the office in there, and that's for the sake of the people. Otherwise, you'd end up judging everything the priest. You always have a constant state of doubt whether this is true or that's true. No, we teach the formal structures. Now, if the presbyter was to do something very scandalous, like have a harlot on the altar at the same time, okay, it's obvious, public, you step away. And that's not going to be a good, God's not going to accept the mysteries offered in that circumstance. But all the things that are done at home, behind privacy, even if it's sort of like known by gossip that he's doing this, we cover these over as like covering over Noah's sin, ignore these things. Those don't interfere. And the same with the opinions. If a priest may have weird opinions about this or that, that's okay, as long as he keeps them as just private opinions at home, or he might write a letter to an article or something like that. But as long as he's not preaching it during the liturgy, if he's preaching his opinions, and which are the same as an ancient heresy, then they are, we don't go. The mystery is not. He's teaching the false things. But again, it's careful that if his opinions are not things that have been condemned already by the ecumenical father, who are we to judge whether that opinion is correct or not? We may be right, it is a wrong opinion, but who are we to make a decision that that opinion is so wrong that that person needs to be defrocked and is speaking heresy? No, this is the council of ecumenical councils come together and they discuss it over a long time. Many bishops, well-trained things, say yes, no, and they come up with all those things and then they make a decision. So who are we to make a judgment on this statement or that statement? Unless, as I said, it's a statement already condemned. As I said, Christ was the time when Christ was not. They're actually saying something that the fathers have condemned. Then we say, oh, you've said it. You've ticked the box here. I can match it, just like here it is. It's written down here not to say this. You said this. Therefore, you come under condemnation. Okay, that's fine. We're not making the decision. They've done something which is decided already. But where it's still something where it's not yet formally at an ecumenical level, really, decided we've got to be very careful that we are not becoming bishops in ourselves and raising ourselves to the level where we judge whether this is or that isn't a heresy. Who are we to be making this decision? So in the sense of condemning the situation, so we have the right to condemn the priest and say he's not a priest, therefore his mysteries are not valid. Now, we have a discernment that this teaching is not good. And so for ourselves, yes, I can say, oh, this is something wrong, but I don't want to hold this teaching. And therefore, I'm going to be very careful of following that. But that's different from condemning them and being the judge who says that's you're outside the church, your sacrament's not valid. Okay, you're a bit dodgy here, I'm not going to follow that. But you're valid. You haven't been condemned of the bishops. You haven't been condemned of that. This heresy is not explicitly stated like that in there. So I'm going to stay clear. Something's wrong with this, but the mysteries are still going to be valid. I'm still going to respect you as a presbyter. And same with ecumenism, for example. Now, ecumenism is bad in a sense because it's sort of saying that all these heresies are not heretics. Now, that's bad in itself. But they're not yet teaching publicly that the heresy is okay. They're just sort of diminishing the status of what happens with the heresy. Not teaching you in church, you must believe in the monophysite position. They're just saying that they believe the same as us. They're still teaching orthodoxy. Well, the Roman Catholics believe as we do. They still teach orthodoxy. They're saying that the Roman Catholics are orthodox, like us. But they're not starting to teach Roman Catholic doctrines at the table. They're not saying, oh, you must believe in the Immaculate Conception, you must believe in the Filioque as correct, you must confess. That's where the difference is. So if they're not teaching us to actually believe and teach the doctrines of these heretics, then they're not teaching heresy. And so ecumenism, why we should stay away from it, is a big problem. We shouldn't be accepting these groups. If they're not teaching it in church, who are we to condemn them again for their dodgy practices, etc.? Because that's not in itself condemned. Though it is a heresy in the sense to ask to pass the judgment on the presbyter or the bishop so that they are not a bishop or presbyter. We are not the authority to do that. We're not in the place to do it. This is why we stick to it, even if we stay away from it. But we're not in the position to pass that judgment so that they are condemned and removed, therefore the mysteries are not good. And if the bishops haven't condemned them, we still follow along. However, having said that, my opinion is we don't want to be a preacher who's teaching things that are a little dodgy. And if you can go to a parish or a priest who is more careful in the Orthodox thing, this is better. And you can keep a little bit of distance from them there. You remember them in the hierarchical form. But yes, you've got to be careful that we don't pick up the poison from them and sort of run around. So if you're seeing someone that seems to be inconsistent, just keep a little bit of distance. But don't condemn them. Don't say that they're no longer got grace, no longer there, and no longer the bishop, they're no longer doing this, the ordinations. No, we don't go to that step. We're not a council of bishops to pass that judgment. But we have a discernment for ourselves in taking on the truth, and we should stay away from those who are not teaching correctly, because that will have a negative effect on us if we're taking their teaching and then we start going off wrong ways. We're responsible for our own thoughts. So my opinion is, yes, don't start judging whether they've got mysteries or sacraments. Yes, if they're still recognized with a hierarchy of a church, and that hierarchy is not formally teaching the heresy, then we'll take it as all good. But yes, take everything that's said, test the prophets, and take everything with a great pinch of salt, and don't go just, oh, he's a priest, therefore everything he says is going to be correct, we must follow everything, or we must follow every opinion of every bishop. No, bishops can be wrong and stuff. Priests can be wrong. We can spout all sorts of nonsense, but God will judge us. But it's a point of you making the judgment, determining that they are no longer priests, they're no longer bishops. We can't do that. We're not in the position to do that. It's only the councils can do it. And the only way you can make that judgment is if they're publicly teaching in a sermon, actually state the things that have explicitly been condemned. Then you step away and you say, I don't want anything to do. But all the dodgy stuff, all the rest, even if it's really like, we don't pass a judgment, we just make very careful when we don't follow along with them.